Who decides when the most powerful frontier AI reaches you? OpenAI says that its new flagship goes public today, Thursday, and that it was cleared by a federal testing lab. The White House says on the record that it approved nothing and holds no switch to flip. Here's the claim I'll stand behind. The protective gate that everyone assumed stood between the public and the newest and most powerful technologies has no keeper anymore. The capability walks out first, then someone writes the rulebook. Come with me, let's get into it. OpenAI said GPT 5.6 will release to the public today, Thursday. It has 3 tiers, the flagship, Sol, plus 2 smaller versions, Terra and Luna, tuned for lower cost and faster response. And OpenAI framed the launch in a very specific way, that the model went through testing at a federal center and it's now cleared to ship. Now, that testing part is real. The Commerce Department's Center for AI Standards and Innovation did evaluate the model. They are a federal testing lab, so OpenAI's story is somewhat clean. The government did test it, and the government found it sound, so now it ships. But then, the White House said the opposite. On the record to reporters, officials said that they gave no such approval. They pointed to an executive order signed on June 2nd, one that was written to bar the federal government from licensing or pre-clearing AI models at all. Their words were, "The government doesn't hold a release switch that it could flip." So let's stop and look at what just happened here. 2 of the most powerful actors in this whole story described the exact same event in ways that cannot both be true. One says a federal body cleared the model, and the other says no federal body has the authority to clear anything. Neither of those is a neutral fact, and both are claims, and both are useful to the people who are making them. OpenAI gains something real if people believe a government lab vetted its model and found it safe. That reads as a credential that you can't buy, and it's one that Anthropic has had a lot of success riding on recently. And the administration gains something if it denies any approval role at all. Admitting one would contradict the deregulation posture that the June order was built to project. So again, read those as claims, not as the record. A recent edition of the Century Report covered the setup here. For weeks, OpenAI was complying with the administration by metering out access to GPT 5.6 one customer at a time through a review queue that it had imposed. But that's what's ending today. The metering stops. Broad access is supposed to arrive. But notice what never actually happened along the way. Nobody ever settled who actually gets to say yes. For most of the industrial era, the approval body for any advanced technology came first. The FDA existed, and then the drug moved through it. Here, the capability shows up now, and the review structure forms around it afterward, contested by everyone with a stake in how much the story reads. So here's the signal to really watch. Say that the next frontier model still routes through the same federal testing lab even after the government says the lab grants nothing. Well, then testing becomes a voluntary credential that the market values on its own, a verification layer that exists because labs keep showing up to it, not because any law requires them to. Now let's shift over to a different kind of gate, the one that the US built around advanced chips, and a crack that is starting to run through it. Yesterday's edition mentioned DeepSeek, the Chinese lab whose cheap, efficient models rattled everyone's assumptions about how much compute that frontier AI really needs. Now it's starting to design its own chips. And here's the next data point, and it's bigger than any one lab. DeepSeek's chip is an inference chip. Training builds the model, and inference runs it to answer your questions. So inference is the everyday workload after training, and it's where the cost per query decides what a lab can actually afford to offer. A custom inference chip is a narrower target than a full training accelerator. The effort is about a year in, and it's still very early. The goal is to lean less on Nvidia hardware that DeepSeek cannot reliably buy under US export controls, and also less on Huawei silicon, which is the domestic fallback. Here's the market number. Bloomberg Intelligence surveyed Chinese executives. Over the next year, they say they plan to route 46% of their AI chip budgets to domestic suppliers, up from 30%. And 80% of them say they're already over budget on infrastructure. So let me be really precise about that shift. It isn't happening because Chinese chips got better. They still lag a little bit on performance. Companies still fight over fab capacity. DeepSeek's own design may take years to prove out at scale. Near term, switching means more expensive compute and slower deployment. So this is friction. This is not a victory lap. This is not something they're doing because they want to. So why do it at all? Because someone deliberately cut off the foreign supply. And that's the whole thing. Export control rests on one assumption. You fence in the capability, and then nobody can rebuild it on the other side of the fence. What this survey is showing is a fence that turned a restriction on buying chips into an incentive to design them instead. Where there was one supply chain, now there are two, and increasingly more. A capability that you can rebuild around any barrier is only ever delayed by the barrier, and the delay hands the people on the other side the reason and eventually the funding to catch up. Next, let's go over to Meta and a capability that landed before the agreement that's supposed to govern it. On Tuesday, Meta Superintelligent Labs shipped its first image model. It's called Muse Image, codenamed Mango internally. It's free right away across all Meta AI, Instagram stories, and WhatsApp. On the pure capability axis, it's a strong entrant into a very crowded field. Generating and editing images from a text prompt is table stakes now. Several systems already do it really well, so the model itself is not really the story. But there's one feature in there that is the story. There is an @ mention that lets any user pull a public Instagram account's photos straight into an image that they're generating. So pay attention to that. You can take a person who never agreed to anything and place them into a scene you invented. Their only protection is that they needed to have found an opt-out setting ahead of time and switched it off. The backlash obviously arrived within hours, and it's easy to misread what it's about. People aren't necessarily objecting to AI images as such. Compositing a real face onto a made-up scene, that's not new, and it isn't harmful on its own. The same technique powers plenty of legitimate creative work. The friction is the default option. You have to opt out. So the burden sits on the person in the photo to have objected in advance. Meta framed the rollout around user control. The company says people can manage who's able to tag them and can remove themselves from the feature. That's Meta's characterization, so hold it as that. And notice the asymmetry inside that. Control you have to discover and toggle before anything happens is control that a lot of people never use. They don't know it's there until the first image already exists and is harmful to them. Now, the same week contrast, which is almost too on the nose, Meta also shipped a genuine privacy safeguard for its smart glasses. There's a little LED that lights up to tell people the glasses are recording. The update makes the camera shut off if someone tampers with that light, closing a loophole that let wearers film people covertly. That protects bystanders. It's a real fix. TechCrunch drew the line directly, and their headline says it plainly. Meta wants its AI glasses to seem less creepy. Its AI strategy says otherwise. That's the full quote. A hardware fix that protects strangers shipped the same week as a software feature that exposes them. But keep in mind, every imaging shift has run this very collision. The Kodak snapshot did it. The camera phone did it. A new capability shows up and an old expectation of who controls your own likeness pushes back. And the norm eventually hardens around the technology instead of banishing it. The most natural reading here is lawsuits and regulation reset the @mentioned default toward opt-in, and the capability underneath stays. The near-term thing to watch for, though, is whether the first regulatory move flips that default to opt-in, or just finds individual harms after they've already happened. Now over to a story that's actually been happening for 9 months without most of us knowing, and the machines in it take a human body out of the line of fire. A company called Forterra disclosed this week that more than 100 of its autonomous vehicles have been running Ukrainian supply lines for the past 9 months. They're called Lancers. It's the largest documented combat deployment of American ground robots to date. The numbers tell you it's real work, not just a demo. Over 2,500 miles driven, more than 1,100 missions, 777,440 pounds of cargo hauled, and 52 casualty evacuations, wounded soldiers pulled out along roads where a human driver would be a target. The machines themselves are almost mundane. They're gas-powered, built on Polaris ATV frames, carrying 750 kilograms with a custom sensor and compute stack wrapped around off-the-shelf hardware. Now here's the honest limit. A human remotely drives most of these missions. The autonomy part handles perceiving the terrain and holding a route well enough to move supplies through contested ground, but it can't yet react to a live enemy the way that a soldier does. A human stays in the loop for the decisions that count. So this is narrower than the autonomous weapons headline, but listen to the economics, because that is where I think the real important thing is. A company representative described the loss rate this way, and these are the exact words. Attrition is just a fact of this battlefield, and we have lost a few at this point, and it hurt, and we need more, and therefore we need them cheaper. And a Ukrainian soldier relayed through the company put it like this: "It's fucking fantastic, and we are dying to get more." So cheaper and more. That's a complete inversion of how defense hardware usually works. The old logic optimized for exquisite, expensive survival platforms. Build few, make each one hard to kill. Attritable robotics flips it. Cheap, replaceable, numerous, designed in a way to be lost. And the demand signal from the field is pulling cost down, not capability up. Hundreds of millions in venture funding is now chasing that curve with competitors like Scout AI, Field AI, and Overland AI. And there is, of course, an uncomfortable part about the cutting edge on the battlefield. The same platform that with a human remote driver evacuates a wounded soldier today is the one that could act without that human tomorrow as the perception and the decision models improve. The machine that saves a life right now and the machine that takes one without asking are the same chassis with improved software and a lethal directive. And someone's writing the framework to hold that accountable after the hardware is already in the field. That gap is the story, right alongside the fact that today, these machines are pulling wounded human beings out of the kill zone. Last one, and this one's the best kind of news because it takes the same economics that you just heard and points them at an operating table. A feasibility study published in Nature showed something surgeons did not expect this soon. It came from UC San Diego's Center for the Future of Surgery, funded by the NSF and the NIH. In a feasibility study, teleoperated humanoid robots performed laparoscopic surgical tasks. So those are minimally invasive surgeries done through small incisions with long, thin instruments and a camera. And the robots did it using standard general-purpose instruments, not the dedicated hardware that has defined robotic surgery for 2 decades now. The system is called LapSurgy. They tested it on benchtop drills, on dry lab exercises with surgeons of different experience levels, and in live pigs. And they benchmarked it against the Da Vinci system, which is the purpose-built robotic surgery console that has anchored this field. It's a machine that cost on the order of $1 million and does exactly one thing. The headline result? The robot completed a live gallbladder removal, a cholecystectomy, on a pig, including the trocar placement that opens the procedure. Now the discipline, because this is a feasibility study and the wonder only counts if it's really honest. A human teleoperated it. It ran on animal models. The author stated it plainly, and I'll quote them: "Key technical challenges must be addressed before clinical deployment." And the competing interest disclosures span Stryker, Johnson & Johnson MedTech, Distal Motion, and Channel Robotics. So keep that in mind whenever you read a near-term readiness claim. No patient can access this yet, and none should expect it super soon. But here's what actually moved. Think about what the Da Vinci is: an exquisite, single-purpose machine engineered for surgery, priced for surgery, useless for basically anything else. A humanoid that picks up the same laparoscopic tools a human surgeon uses is a general platform, and somebody taught it a procedure. And a general platform spreads its cost across every task that it can learn. The thing that this cracks then is surgical capability. It's one of the most tightly rationed resources in all of medicine, gated by the number of trained hands and by the geography that those hands are willing to live in. A machine that you teach a procedure rather than build for exactly one is the first crack in that scarcity. This study doesn't put a robot in your OR, no, but what it does do is move the date to when those OR robots can be everywhere. It brings forward the moment that surgical skill stops being locked inside a $1 million single-purpose console. All right, let's bring it together. One shape repeated across all 5 stories today. The capability shows up first, and the structure meant to govern it forms afterward, argued over publicly by whoever has a stake in how it reads. GPT 5.6 ships, we are told, today, before anyone can agree who's allowed to even authorize that release. DeepSeek's chip and the 46% budget shift are rebuilding a capability that the export fence was built to hold in place. Muse Image landed before the consent rule that it needs, and the battlefield robots and the surgical robots are both out here doing real work, while the accountability runs to catch up behind them. So who opens that gate now? Today's honest answer is, for a while, nobody's sure. The old assumption was that an approval body stands between a powerful capability and the people who get to use it. A gate with a keeper. What these 5 stories show is that the keeper keeps going missing. The White House disclaiming the switch, the export fence sprouting a door, and the consent norm arriving late. But don't hear that as things just falling apart. Hear where it's going, because the gate losing its keeper is the same event as the capability reaching more people. The frontier model reaching the public, the chip getting built outside the choke point, surgical skill leaving the $1 million console that trapped it, a wounded soldier coming home on a machine instead of a stretcher, and a stretcher bearer avoiding being a target. The verification, the consent rules, the accountability, those are getting built too, out in the open, one disputed launch at a time. Nobody hands them down from a keeper who has never really been there. The people the capability reaches write them as it reaches them. That's slower and it's messier. It's also the first time that more than one hand is drafting the rulebook. So when you put the day down, the gate is open and unguarded, and the crowd walking through it is bigger than it ever has been before. See you tomorrow.